Is a marketing agency owner, is your compensation reasonable? What's up, everybody? My name is Chris Hervochon, CPA. The website is betterwaycpa.com, and today I'm going to talk about reasonable compensation for you as a marketing agency owner if you have an S Corp. So if your marketing agency is organized as an S Corp, you need to take reasonable compensation. That's what we're going to talk about. So what is the problem? So you're a marketing agency owner and your agency is taxed as an S Corp. And as an S Corp owner, you must take reasonable compensation. It's stressful every year to figure out how much your salary should be, and you want to keep the IRS off your back. Now, I talked in my previous video on the QBI deduction about different types of pass-through entities. An S Corp is a pass-through entity, which means that there is no tax paid by the S Corp itself. It flows through to the owner. So if you were the owner of an S Corp, your S Corp is not taxed. You are taxed on your personal tax return. Now, what is the benefit of an S Corp? Well, basically, anything that's over and above the reasonable compensation is it comes out of the S Corp to you as the owner as a dividend. And dividends are taxed at a lower rate than regular income, so W-2 income, income that you get like in a paycheck, for instance. And so the benefit here is to have your actual wages to be as low as possible so that your dividends are as high as possible and then you pay less tax. Well, the IRS, basically they have said that you need to take compensation that is reasonable, so higher than zero for sure, right? But the higher the better for the IRS because they get to collect more payroll tax. Pretty simple. So you would think that there would be a formula for how to calculate this, and there absolutely positively is not. However, there are tons of court cases around this. As you can imagine, this is a hot button topic, and so we kind of have a little bit of a guide map. Okay. Now the first question is, are you an employee? So an employee income, as I mentioned, is taxed higher than dividend income. If you are providing substantial services to the S Corp, if you are the only person working in the S Corp, so in other words, it's just you are a sole person working in your marketing agency, then yeah, you're definitely going to be an employee. If you're providing substantial services, you're definitely going to be an employee. If you're basically just sitting at home providing no services to the business and you're just collecting checks, then maybe you've got an argument. But I will tell you, of all the court cases that I've looked at and of all the articles I've read, that was only successful in one instance where an S Corp owner was able to challenge the IRS and say that they were not an employee, they were just a shareholder, and they won. That is most certainly not the rule. Okay, so if you're the sole worker in the business, the answer is definitely yes. You're definitely going to be an employee. Now, 63.2% of agencies are 0 to 4 people. I don't know how you can have a 0 to 4 or a 0-person agency, but that's the stat from IBIS. So basically 1 to 4 people. That makes up about 2/3 of all marketing agencies. Now, an additional 14.6% are between 5 and 9 employees. So what this means is about 78% of all marketing agencies are between 1 and 9 employees. And there's actually case law around this regarding that whole employee discussion. And it comes from Radke that was decided in the Ninth Circuit Court. And the exact quote that the court decided, or that the quote that the court provided was, where the corporation's only director had the corporation pay himself, the only significant employee, no salary for substantial services, his dividends functioned as remuneration for employment. So what that means is if you're the only person working in that business, if you're providing substantial services, if you are the business, then your dividends are going to be classified as wages. So, but here are the factors to consider when we're thinking about what reasonable compensation should be. And I've said in prior videos, all of my marketing agency clients are S Corps. They're all taking salary, some sort of a salary from their agency. They're all on payroll, so the salary is it's automated. So you're getting direct deposit, on some sort of a normal schedule. Taxes are being taken out. They're being remitted to the IRS in the state or states. And, so that process is happening. But in order to get to that number of what you should be paid on that schedule, that's going to be your reasonable compensation amount. Everything else that you take out of the business, when you cut yourself a check, when you go to the bank, take something out of the ATM, that's going to be a dividend. And we need to get to a good, reasonable compensation number. So here are the factors to consider. These were provided by the IRS in their fact sheet The link to that fact sheet is going to be in the show notes today, and it's also in the slides, so you can go and take a look at it. It's about a decade or so old, I think. And what they're going to look at is your training and experience, your duties and responsibilities. So what kind of services are you providing to the business? Like I said, if you are the business, then that's going to be significant. That should affect your pay, right? So if you are the business and your business is making $100,000, it's not reasonable for you to take a $2,000 salary. You are the business. Time and effort devoted to the business. So if you're working, 80 hours a week, you're going to have a really hard time saying that you should be paid less than somebody, who's an employee who's working 35. Dividend history. So historically, what do your dividends look like? Payments to non-shareholder employees, and this one is crucial. You want to make sure that you don't have employees who are paid more than you. So in other words, if you have agency employees who are dealing with clients, then maybe they're running Facebook ads, maybe they're producing content, writing blog posts, things like that, and you've got somebody who's making $45,000, $50,000. You, as the agency owner, providing significant time and having lots of responsibilities, should not be making $40,000 or $45,000. That person shouldn't be making more than you. That's a test that the IRS is going to go through. Timing and manner of paying bonuses to keep people. What they're going to look at is whether or not you're trying to game the system. If you have that oh crap moment on the 31st of December, like I'm not getting paid enough, those sorts of things. What comparable businesses pay for similar services? The IRS actually has a case out, or the tax court has a case out there where they recalculated somebody's reasonable compensation and they used RMA data. RMA data is benchmarking data. It's data that I use actually for my Wayfinder, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you've seen any of my other videos. The link to the marketing agency Wayfinder is going to be linked in the show notes. But at any rate, RMA data is one of the data sources that we can use as accounting and finance professionals to benchmark your agency against other agencies. It'll give us things like owner compensation, employee compensation, things like that. There are other services that we use. There are other services that I use that we can determine what other comparable businesses are going to pay to their employees and to their owners. And another way to look at this also is to look at salary surveys or talk to an HR professional or some sort of an outsourced HR professional if you have one. Like I said, a lot of agencies, 78% or so, are less than 9 people. You may or may not have a full-time HR person. If you don't, you should have an outsourced HR person, and you should be able to ask that person, hey, what are other businesses similar to mine paying people or paying folks like me? There's also salary surveys out there. Robert Half is a good one. They do one for marketing creative individuals, and you should be able to look on there and figure out, whether or not what you're paying yourself is reasonable, based on all of these different data sources. Compensation agreements, do they exist? What kind of provisions are in there? Do you use a formula to determine your compensation? So have you standardized this in some way, shape, or form? And this is something that I definitely recommend. This is a problem that I can help you solve with your agency. I can put together a formula for you to determine what your compensation should be that's based on a number of factors like I just talked about, the RMA data, different benchmarking data, salary surveys, what your actual agency income is. I can help you with that. But if you can standardize that, show that you've standardized it, and continue to use that formula going forward, that's going to be helpful for you because it's going to be evidence that you are in fact trying to pay yourself reasonably. Finally here, a couple more points. The means of the business to pay. If your business is undercapitalized, if you require great reinvestment, you can make the argument, hey, I can't pay myself any more than this. So even though my agency was profitable, it did really well, I can't pay myself more than what I'm currently paying myself because those funds need to be used for reinvestment, or we have a capital shortfall, we're going to need more capital going forward. Basically, if your agency has $100,000 in gross revenue, but in reality your net is 20, well then you can't pay yourself 25, right? You don't want to put yourself in a worse capital position. I talked about working capital in a previous video as well for marketing agencies. I suggest you go check that out. That's going to be linked in the show notes as well. And then finally, the performance of the business relative to itself. Are you doing better this year than you did last year? If so, you should probably be making more money, right? How is it performing relative to peers? That's where benchmarking data comes in. If your agency, I've got clients who work from home, they've got very little overhead, they're growing gangbusters, they're doing really, really well relative to themselves, their compensation needs to be growing over time. One of the things that you can build into that model that I talked about a couple of bullet points ago, that formula, is how your agency is doing relative to itself and relative to your peers. So you can kind of factor all of these things in when you're putting together that model and making sure that you're paying yourself reasonably. So a final couple Jack Andy deep thoughts. Reasonable compensation is not one size fits all. There is no set formula, though there is a lot of case law around this to help guide us. And so there's a ton of factors that we need to consider. Every agency is unique. Every situation is unique. They're not all the same. And so you need to have a standardized formula considering all of these factors put in place. You've got to have if you're an S Corp, you've got to have a shareholder meeting at least once a year. It would be a good idea at that shareholder meeting to adopt this compensation plan or to adopt this formula, as well as to adopt compensation plans for all of your employees. And then finally, reasonable compensation is extremely important from a tax perspective. It impacts payroll taxes and also impacts things such as QBI. You want your reasonable compensation to be reasonable, number one, but you want it to be as low as possible so that you're paying the least amount of tax. It is certainly a lot cheaper from a tax perspective to take dividends than it is to pay yourself a salary. So we need to be thinking about that. But we also need to be balancing this with the QBI deduction, which I talked about in another video. So there's a lot of factors here. It's really good to model these things out and to have a really good understanding of what your reasonable compensation is and why and what it should be and how it's going to impact your tax situation. That is something that I can help you with if you are interested. So resources for today, the YouTube link, which I mentioned, can marketing agency owners take advantage of the QBI deduction? It's a good video. It talks about more in depth about pass-through entities, what they are. It goes through what an S Corp is. I know I touched on it briefly here today. Another YouTube video, marketing agencies and working capital, which I just mentioned a few minutes ago. That's also a good video to watch to understand working capital and how that may impact your reasonable compensation. You can kind of tie those two things together. The IRS fact sheet that I mentioned, it's called Wage Compensation for S Corporation Officers. It is 2 pages long, two to 3 pages long. A fairly easy read. I highly recommend you take a look at that. It's very digestible. And then finally, I mentioned that Robert Half Creative and Marketing Salary Guide. Definitely do take a look at that when you're thinking about what you should be paying your employees, what you're paying your employees currently, whether or not they're paid well or underpaid, or how that looks. And then also to inform what you should be making. Again, you don't want to be making less than your employees for sure. Let's connect. Chris@BetterWayCPA.com, phone number 843-608-0298. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Quora, Instagram, and Pinterest. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please like it and share it. Please comment on the video below. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It helps me to grow my audience, and it also helps to inform what kind of content you want to see in the future. So I appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.